Two of the biggest franchises in the WNBA just made decisions this week that could completely reshape their futures. And here's the thing, neither move is getting the praise the front offices probably expected. On one side, you've got the New York Liberty locking in 3 supermax eligible stars and acting like everything's perfect. On the other, you've got the Chicago Sky literally paying draft picks to keep a roster together that won 10 games all season. 10. Both fan bases are frustrated. Both front offices seem disconnected from reality. And both decisions expose a deeper problem that's quietly spreading across the league organizations that don't understand how to build a championship roster in a hard-cap world. What's about to unfold over the next few months could be the most dramatic stretch in recent WNBA history, and most people aren't even paying attention to why. Let's start in New York, because Sabrina Ionescu just put pen to paper on a contract extension with the Liberty, and she went out of her way to sell it like this was the best news the franchise has ever received. Big smile, confident energy. The kind of announcement that's designed to make fans feel like everything is under. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a video. Control. But if you actually look past the surface, the reality is a lot more complicated than that press-friendly moment suggests. Sabrina just came off major knee surgery. Not a minor tweak, not a little soreness. She played through actual surgery on her knee that kept her limited and clearly affected her game during stretches of the 2024 season. And yet, here she is, locking in long-term, committing to a franchise that's about to face one of the most difficult cap situations in the league. Now, nobody's questioning Sabrina's talent. When she's healthy and in rhythm, she's one of the most dynamic guards in the entire WNBA. Her shooting range is elite, her playmaking has improved every single year, and she brings a competitive edge that every championship team needs. That's not the issue. The issue is what her extension represents within the bigger picture of New York's financial reality. Because Sabrina isn't the only Liberty star eligible for supermax money. She's one of 3. And when you start doing the math on what happens when all 3 of those contracts kick in under a hard salary cap, the numbers get ugly fast. Sabrina's extension is the first domino, and the second one was already tipping over before the ink was dry. Breanna Stewart didn't wait long to make her own announcement. She hopped on her podcast this week and made it crystal clear she's staying in New York. No free agency meetings. No entertaining offers from other teams. Her family is settled. Her life is set up in the city, and she's not going anywhere. On the surface, that sounds like exactly what Liberty fans wanted to hear. Their best player, their franchise cornerstone, publicly committing to the team without any hesitation. She even had the Statue of Liberty emoji energy going, like this was a celebration. But here's what jumped out to anyone who was actually listening closely. Not once, not a single time during that entire podcast segment did Breanna Stewart mention taking a pay cut. She didn't talk about restructuring her deal. She didn't hint at sacrificing a single dollar to help the front office build a deeper roster around her. She talked about her family. She talked about being comfortable. She talked about loyalty, all great things. But she carefully, almost surgically, avoided the money conversation entirely. And that's not an accident. Breanna Stewart was one of the vice presidents on the board that negotiated the current CBA. She sat in those rooms. She fought for these supermax contracts. She helped create the financial framework that now allows players to earn $1.4 million per season. There is absolutely zero chance she's going to turn around and voluntarily leave that money on the table. Think about the psychology of that for a second. You spend months, maybe years, negotiating a collective bargaining agreement that raises the salary ceiling for the league's best players. You advocate publicly for players getting paid what they're worth. You position yourself as a leader in the fight for fair compensation. And then your own team asks you to take less? That's never happening. Stewart wants every penny of that $1.4 million supermax, and honestly, she's earned it on the court. But wanting the money and the team being able to afford the consequences of paying it are two completely different conversations. And New York is about to find out just how different they are. If Breanna Stewart was truly standing on business when it comes to winning another championship, that podcast would have included one sentence, something like, "I'm willing to do whatever it takes financially to make sure this team has the depth to compete." She didn't say it because she doesn't mean it. The commitment is to New York, the city, not necessarily to New York, the championship contender. And that distinction is going to matter more than anyone in that organization wants to admit right now. So let's do the math that the Liberty's front office is apparently hoping nobody does. Sabrina Ionescu just locked in. Breanna Stewart has publicly committed and is almost certainly taking the supermax. That's 2 of the 3 slots spoken for. Now add Jonquel Jones to the equation. Jones has been quiet through all of this. No podcast appearances, no public commitments, no smiling contract signing videos. And her silence is telling. She's also eligible for supermax money, and after what she's dealt with over the past season, there's a real question about what direction she goes. Jones was riddled with injuries during the 2024 season. She missed time, played through pain when she was on the court, and clearly wasn't the same dominant force that helped New York win it all in 2023. But here's the thing, being injured doesn't mean you don't want to get paid. If anything, players coming off injury-plagued seasons are sometimes even more motivated to lock in guaranteed money while they can. Nobody knows what the future holds for their body, and a $1.4 million supermax provides security that no amount of team-friendly discount can replace. If Jonquel Jones takes the supermax, and most signs point in that direction, the Liberty will have 3 players consuming nearly their entire salary cap. In a league with a hard cap, that's not just a concern, it's a structural crisis. The WNBA's hard cap doesn't bend. It doesn't care about your championship history. It doesn't care about your star power. It doesn't offer luxury tax exceptions or bird rights or any of the creative accounting tricks that NBA teams use to spend their way out of roster problems. When you hit the ceiling, you're done. You fill the remaining spots with whatever you can afford. And what you can afford is minimum contract players and overseas hopefuls who are willing to take almost nothing for a chance to be on a roster. Picture what the Liberty's bench looks like next season if all 3 supermaxes hit. You've got Sabrina, Stewart, and Jones as your top 3. And then you've got 9 roster spots filled with players making the league minimum. These aren't bad players. Minimum contract veterans and hungry young talents can absolutely contribute. But they're not the caliber of depth you need to survive a full WNBA season and then compete in the playoffs against teams that have actual balance. Remember what happened to the Golden State Warriors in the NBA when they stacked max contracts on Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Kevin Durant, and Draymond Green? They won titles, sure, but eventually the lack of depth caught up to them. Role players left for better money elsewhere. The bench got thinner and thinner. Injuries exposed just how fragile a top-heavy roster really is. And that was in the NBA, where the cap is softer and teams have way more financial tools to work with. The WNBA's hard cap makes this problem 10 times worse. New York is essentially building a 3-legged stool and hoping nobody ever kicks one of the legs. But legs get kicked in professional sports all the time. They're called injuries, foul trouble, fatigue, off nights, personal issues, any of the 100 things that can take a star player off the court for a game or a week or a month. When that happens to a team with depth, the next player steps up. When it happens to a team running 9 minimum salary reserves, the whole thing collapses. And that brings us to the part of this story that should genuinely worry Liberty fans more than anything else, the health situation. Let's not sugarcoat this. All 3 of New York's potential supermax players dealt with significant injury concerns during the 2024 season. Sabrina Ionescu had major knee surgery. That's not a minor procedure. Knee injuries for guards are particularly concerning because so much of their game depends on lateral quickness, change of direction, and the ability to stop on a dime and rise up for a jumper. Even when players come back from knee surgery and look physically fine, there's often a mental adjustment period, a split second of hesitation before making a cut, a slight reluctance to drive into traffic, a subconscious tendency to favor the healthy leg. These things don't always show up in the box score, but they show up in the flow of the game. Breanna Stewart was battling her own injury issues throughout the season. She's one of the most durable players in WNBA history when healthy, but 2024 tested that reputation. She played through discomfort, and there were stretches where she clearly wasn't herself. For a player whose game relies on versatility, posting up, facing up, stepping out to three, running the floor in transition, any physical limitation reduces her effectiveness across every dimension of what she does. And Jonquel Jones missed significant time entirely. When your interior anchor is in and out of the lineup, it disrupts everything. Defensive rotations change, rebounding assignments shift. Offensive spacing gets thrown off because the player who's supposed to be commanding attention in the paint is sitting on the bench in street clothes. Now imagine all three of these players locked into supermax contracts. And imagine one of them goes down for a month in the middle of the season. What does New York do? They can't call up a replacement from the G League. The WNBA doesn't work that way. They can't make a mid-season trade for a quality starter because they have no cap space to absorb a salary. They're stuck with whatever minimum contract players they managed to sign in the offseason, and those players are being asked to fill a supermax-sized hole in the rotation. The Minnesota Lynx learned this lesson the hard way. The Las Vegas Aces are learning it right now, even as defending champions. When you build your entire identity around 3 or 4 stars, and something goes wrong with any one of them, the drop-off is catastrophic. There's no safety net. Unquote. There's no backup plan. There's just a head coach trying to figure out how to get 40 minutes of competitive basketball out of players who were signed as the 10th, 11th, and 12th options on the roster. Star power wins individual games. Depth wins championships. And New York just made a very loud, very public bet that star power is enough. History says it usually isn't, especially not in a hard cap league where you can't buy your way out of mistakes once the season starts. Now let's shift to a story that's somehow even more baffling than New York's cap gymnastics. The Chicago Sky just pulled off a series of moves ahead of the expansion draft that have their entire fan base questioning whether anyone in the front office actually watches basketball. Here's what happened. With the WNBA expanding to 15 teams, Portland Fire and Toronto Tempo joining the league on May 8th, every existing franchise had to make decisions about which players to protect and which to leave exposed in the expansion draft. This is a routine part of league growth. It happens in every major sport when new teams enter, and for struggling franchises, the expansion draft is actually a hidden gift. It's a chance to offload players who aren't working out, clear roster spots, reset your identity, and start building towards something better without having to eat the full cost of those decisions. The Chicago Sky, a team that went 10-34 last season, let me say that again, 10 wins and 34 losses, decided they didn't want that gift. Instead, they traded draft picks to both Portland and Toronto in exchange for a promise that neither expansion team would select any of Chicago's unprotected players. Portland received the 17th overall pick and sent back the 21st. Toronto took the 26th pick outright. In return, Chicago gets to keep their entire roster intact. Every single player from a team that won 10 games. Nobody gets taken. Nobody gets moved. The band stays together. Chicago now holds the 5th, 21st, and 32nd picks in the upcoming April 13th draft, 1 pick in each of the first 3 rounds. And the front office is apparently presenting this as a savvy maneuver, a way to protect the roster and maintain stability heading into a new season. But stability in what? Stability in losing? Because that's what this roster produced last year. and that's what it's positioned to produce again if nothing changes. The trade with Portland is particularly frustrating when you break it down. Moving from the 17th pick to the 21st pick might not sound like a big deal in the abstract, but in the WNBA draft, where rosters are small and every player matters more than in any other professional league, 4 spots in the second round can be the difference between landing a legitimate rotation player and ending up with someone who doesn't make the final roster. Those 4 spots represent potential. They represent options. And Chicago gave them away so they could keep a group of players that couldn't defend, couldn't execute in close games, and couldn't crack double-digit wins over an entire season. The 26th pick they sent to Toronto is another lost asset. Third-round picks aren't glamorous, but they're opportunities, chances to take a flyer on an overseas prospect, or a developmental player who might blossom in 2 years, or a specialist who fills a specific role the team is missing. Every pick has value, especially for a team that desperately needs an influx of talent. And Chicago just lit 2 of them on fire to avoid the minor inconvenience of losing a player from their unprotected list. Here's what makes this whole situation particularly painful. Angel Reese and Kamilla Cardoso are on this team, 2 of the most exciting young players in the entire league, both coming off rookie seasons that showcased legitimate star potential. Angel Reese didn't just have a good rookie year, she had a historically great one. She set the single-season rebounding record. She was putting up double-doubles so consistently that it almost became routine, which is absurd when you consider she was a first-year player adjusting to the professional game. Her energy, her toughness, her refusal to back down from anyone on the court, that's the kind of foundation you build a franchise around. Kamilla Cardoso showed flashes of being a dominant interior force when her body cooperated. Her size, her touch around the basket, her ability to alter shots on the defensive end, all of it points to a player who could be an all-star caliber center if given the right supporting cast and development environment. These 2 players deserve an organization that matches their ambition and work ethic. What they got instead was a front office that just told the entire league, "We're running it back with the same supporting cast that helped us win 10 games. No coaching changes, no front office shakeup, no accountability whatsoever. Just draft picks traded away to maintain the status quo." The fan reaction was immediate and brutal. One comment on the Sky's official announcement captured the mood perfectly. Not 1, but 2 expansion teams fleeced the Chicago Sky, making trades to keep a squad together that won 10 games and lost 34. Nobody has been fired. Nobody has been held accountable. This is organizational malpractice. Another fan wrote something even more cutting. "You shouldn't publicly admit to being so poorly run. This is awful." And maybe the most telling reaction came from someone who directed their frustration straight at the young stars Angel Reese, Kamilla Cardoso. Listen, if this isn't an April Fool's joke, it really comes to a point as a player where you need to demand a trade, because this is totally unfair to you guys. You both deserve to make it to the playoffs. Fans are tired. That's not just frustration. That's a fan base that's watched their organization make the same mistakes over and over and over, and they've reached the point where they're actively encouraging their best players to leave. When your own supporters are telling your franchise cornerstones to demand trades, something has gone fundamentally wrong at every level of decision-making. And the worst part? Portland and Toronto knew exactly what they were doing. Think about it from the expansion team's perspective. You're building a franchise from scratch. You're looking at the expansion draft board and identifying which players from existing teams might actually help your roster. Are you really targeting players from a 1-0 win team? Maybe 1 or 2 specific players catch your eye, but the overall talent on Chicago's unprotected list probably wasn't keeping Portland or Toronto's front offices up at night. So when Chicago called and offered draft picks in exchange for a promise not to select anyone, Portland and Toronto probably couldn't believe their luck. They got free assets, actual draft capital that they can use to build their franchises in exchange for agreeing not to take players they probably weren't going to take anyway. That's not a trade. That's a donation. Chicago essentially walked up to two brand new franchises and handed them gifts for doing absolutely nothing. And then they announced it publicly, like it was a strategic masterstroke. Now, let's connect these two stories, because when you zoom out and look at what both New York and Chicago did this week, a fascinating pattern emerges. Both franchises made decisions that prioritize short-term comfort over long-term success. They just did it in completely opposite ways. New York went aggressive. They locked in their stars, committed to supermax spending, and bet everything on the idea that three elite players can overcome the depth problems that a hard cap creates. It's a bold strategy, but it's bold in the way that going all in on a poker hand is bold. You might win big, but if the cards don't fall your way, you've got nothing left. Chicago went passive. They avoided every hard decision the expansion draft presented, traded away assets to preserve a failed roster, and signaled to their young stars that organizational comfort matters more than organizational improvement. It's not bold at all. It's the front office equivalent of pulling the covers over your head and hoping the problems go away by morning. Both approaches ignore the same fundamental truth about building a winner in the WNBA. In a hard cap league, roster construction is everything. You can't just stack talent at the top and hope it trickles down. You can't just avoid making changes and hope things magically get better. You need balance. You need depth. You need players who fit specific roles and embrace those roles. You need a front office that's willing to make unpopular decisions today to put the team in a better position tomorrow. The contrast with franchises that actually understand this is striking. Look at Indiana. The Fever have Caitlin Clark on a rookie contract, which gives them years of salary cap flexibility to build around her with complementary pieces. They're not trying to squeeze 3 max contracts under the cap. They're constructing a roster where every player serves a purpose and the overall balance makes the team greater than the sum of its parts. That's smart team building. That's how you sustain success in a hard cap environment. Connecticut has taken a similar approach, a balanced roster with no single player consuming a massive chunk of the cap, which allows them to maintain depth at every position and weather the inevitable injuries and rough stretches that every team faces during a season. Even Las Vegas, the defending champions, is starting to feel the pain of their superstar spending. The Aces have been one of the most dominant teams in recent WNBA history, but the cracks are showing. When your top players take up most of the cap and your depth players are replaceable pieces, every injury, every off night, every foul trouble situation becomes magnified. The margin for error shrinks to almost nothing. New York is voluntarily walking but the best same trap, and Chicago is stuck in a different trap entirely, one where they have young talent but refuse to build properly around it. So, here's what's going to happen next, and you can come back to this in 6 months and check the receipts. New York will start the 2025 season strong. They will. Their top 3 players are that talented, and when Sabrina, Stewart, and Jones are all healthy and engaged, the Liberty can beat anyone on any given night. The first month or two will feel like vindication for everyone who supported the Supermax approach. Fans will point to the win column and say the doubters were wrong. But somewhere around mid-season, maybe sooner, if injuries hit early, the cracks will start to show. The starters will be logging heavy minutes every single game because there's nobody on the bench capable of giving them meaningful rest. Fatigue will accumulate quietly at first. Then, suddenly, a game where Sabrina's legs look heavy and her jumper is falling short. A week where Stewart's nagging injuries flare up and she's playing at 70%. A stretch where Jones is sitting out for rest that's really about the team protecting a fragile body from further breakdown. And when those inevitable rough patches hit, the Liberty will look at their bench and realize there's nobody there who can carry the load for even a few minutes. They'll lose games they should win because their 9th and 10th players are being asked to defend starters. They'll lose games in the fourth quarter because their stars are gassed from playing 3-5+ minutes every night. And by playoff time, when rotations tighten and every possession matters, New York will be running on fumes against teams with fresh legs and deeper rotations. Chicago's season will follow a depressingly familiar script. Training camp will bring optimism, because that's what training camp always brings. Angel Reese will look dominant in preseason. Kamilla Cardoso will flash her potential. New coach, same leadership, but fans will convince themselves that maybe this year is different. It won't be. The same roster that went 10-34 will produce similar results because the underlying problems were never addressed. The shooting won't be there. The perimeter defense won't be there. The late-game execution won't be there. Because you can't fix those problems by simply running it back with the same players and hoping they collectively improve by 20-plus wins. That's not how professional sports work. By the All-Star break, the fan base will be calling for the same front office changes they're calling for right now. The only difference is they'll be angrier because they'll have wasted another half season watching their young stars get buried on a team going nowhere. And here's the twist that most people aren't talking about yet. The expansion teams, Portland and Toronto, are going to quietly benefit from all of this dysfunction. They just acquired extra draft picks from Chicago for free. They're going to build their rosters methodically, targeting undervalued veterans and overseas talent that other teams overlooked. They'll develop young players, establish a culture, and build the kind of balanced depth that wins in a hard-cap league. In 2 or 3 years, don't be surprised if Portland or Toronto is better positioned for sustained success than either New York or Chicago. That's not a wild prediction. That's just what happens when competent organizations build from the ground up while established franchises make short-sighted decisions. The WNBA is in a golden era right now. Ratings are surging. Attendance is climbing. Stars like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese are bringing unprecedented mainstream attention to the league. Corporate sponsors are investing at levels nobody thought possible 5 years ago. This should be the moment where every franchise capitalizes on the momentum and builds something sustainable. But some teams are going to waste this opportunity. They're going to make decisions based on ego, comfort, and fear instead of strategy, flexibility, and long-term vision. And when the window closes, because windows always close, they'll look back at this exact moment and wonder why they didn't do things differently. New York chose aggression without balance. Chicago chose passivity without accountability. Both paths lead to the same destination, a franchise wondering what went wrong, and a fan base wondering why nobody in charge saw it coming. The biggest question coming out of all of this is one that every WNBA fan should be debating right now. Which team made the worst decision? Is it New York, committing supermax money to 3 injury-prone stars with no viable plan for roster depth, essentially gambling their entire future on the hope that health and talent alone can overcome structural limitations? Or is it Chicago, trading away draft capital to protect a 10-34 roster with no coaching changes, no front office accountability, and no apparent plan beyond hoping their young stars can drag a flawed team to relevance through sheer willpower? Both decisions represent organizational failure, but they're completely different kinds of failure. New York is failing aggressively, swinging for the fences and accepting the risk that comes with it. Chicago is failing passively, refusing to swing at all and accepting mediocrity as the default. If you're Angel Reese sitting in Chicago right now, watching the front office trade away picks to keep the same players who helped produce the worst record in the league around you, what are you thinking? If you're Kamilla Cardoso, watching other young stars like Caitlin Clark get placed in situations with cap flexibility and competent roster construction, what are you feeling? Because at some point, talent demands opportunity. And if the organization you're on won't provide that opportunity, you start looking at franchises that will. Indiana is building something real. Connecticut has stability and balance. Even the expansion teams in Portland and Toronto are starting from scratch with a clean slate and actual assets to work with. Staying on a team that just signaled it's not serious about winning, that's a hard sell for any competitor, let alone players with the kind of fire that Reese and Cardoso bring every single night. The WNBA is too good right now, and these stories are too important to just let them pass without breaking down what's really happening behind the press releases and the smiling contract announcements. What we saw this week wasn't just roster moves. It was two franchises revealing exactly who they are and what they value. New York values star power above all else, even when the math doesn't support it. Chicago values comfort and avoidance, even when the results scream for change. And the rest of the league is watching, taking notes, and getting ready to take advantage of both. Stay locked with my channel. Simply Explained for more update.